I read this study once that said that having plants around you increases your happiness levels. And I teach in a typical orchestra classroom, with cinder block walls and a couple of small windows on the doors that look into the exterior cinder block walls on the adjacent classroom. So I bought a plant and I put it in my office. And I got this plant right here from my buddy Joe's wedding. It was one of the table decorations and they said I could have it, so I managed to keep it alive through the years. And a former student gave me this big one over here. And another student gave me this one. And this one right here with the cement base was given to me by a former colleague who went on to administration, so now I have a lot of plants. Did they make me happier? Absolutely not. They almost died. And especially the ones that were gifts, What an insult to the gift giver, right? To kill their plants. Well, it turns out that I was given some general advice about how much to water succulents and how much light they should receive. And this advice might have worked out great for some people, but not for me. It was killing my plants. I don't want to brag, but my office is super fancy. The lights are on a motion sensor and timer. So if there's no motion for more than 5 minutes, the lights turn off in the room. And true story, most plants need light sometimes. So I got a lamp to keep them alive when the lights go off. And some of the bases are smaller than others, so I had to water them more because they couldn't contain enough water for the plants. And guess what? The plants got healthier. And long story short, I now have a bunch of plants, and to make them the healthiest that they can be. And that's what we must think of when we're looking at our orchestra programs. Okay, what's in our control? What's outside of our control? And the idea is to take what we can control and scale it to the things that we can't control to get the best results, right? Scaling. I give a whole lot of general advice on this channel, but how can you scale all of this stuff to what you do in your classroom and outside of your classroom to best fit your students? Welcome back to Teaching Orchestra. How do orchestra teachers develop their conceptual framework of what an orchestra program should be like? Maybe from their experience as a student? What was my orchestra like in secondary school, right? But then what happens when you go off to university? And it turns out that everything that your orchestra teacher did was completely and totally wrong, and all of these PhDs are going to set you straight, right? So your standards might change a little bit after attending university. Maybe you go to a conference and you see a featured orchestra like at the Midwest Clinic or your Music Educators Association. Maybe you decide to take a trip and go down the road and visit a school nearby and visit one of their programs and base your expectations on them based on their local geography or whatever. This can shape your outlook and have an unbelievably powerful influence on what you do with your students. And you might draw some comparisons, and some of these comparisons can be really useful. You can borrow some different ideas and different perspectives and take them back with you. This is a healthy thing to do, and it's fine. But while you're drawing comparisons, it's also good to try and compare the totality of the circumstances. Now, in your head right now, and be honest, there's a little voice telling you, it kind of sounds like we're headed towards excuse making, right? We don't make excuses, we get results.
Don't give me excuses, give me results!
We've been told this our whole lives, right? And what's the most effective manipulation tactic against an orchestra teacher? Shame. Going back to my plant analogy at the beginning of this episode, let's say you have a plant and you're limited to the amount of water that you can give the plant, or you're limited to the amount of light the plant has, or you're limited to the amount of soil. Are you just going to scream at your plant and say, "Grow"? Why aren't you growing, you silly plant? Stop making excuses. But on the other hand, your program also doesn't need to be a dumpster fire, right? Just because you don't get everything that you want, all right? Think about that documentary that they did on Fabio Chavez and his music school in Paraguay when they had more students than instruments. Or think of Dr. Shinichi Suzuki, who turned orphans like Koji Toyota into the concertmaster of the Berlin Radio Philharmonic Orchestra. You can still get great results, but the way you get there might be different because of the resources you have. Any good manager or CEO knows this. They make decisions based on what they've got every day. And sometimes people attempt to guilt them into doing weird stuff like, hey, why did you lay off those people, you greedy jerk? Or, hey, why did you raise the price of Choco-Cola and make more money, you money-hungry, greedy sociopath? Or like, hey, Elon Musk, haven't you made enough money? Why not just give away all your Teslas for free? The idea is that you utilize what you have to get the best result, right? And you grow from there, right? You can't just copy and paste from another teacher. Not exactly, anyway. It might not work well for you in your situation, so you have to scale. So just another example of this and how it might work, I'm going to use an example from Debbie Lyle, who is the executive director of the Foundation for the Advancement of String Education, okay, right? FACE, right? The Bornoff Foundation. She's a master level teacher, no doubt about it. And she was telling me about how when she was teaching at St. Anne's, they shortened her instruction time for her beginners down to just 1 day a week. So she had to scale her teaching down to her time requirements. She had to change something in her teaching that she had never done before. She started using tapes on the instruments. That's an example of how to scale your resources. It's not giving up. It's not surrendering. There's no white flags here. There doesn't have to be any shame attached to it. It's just a frontal lobe decision-making process rather than making an emotional one. Okay, let's take a look at an example of what it looks like when we don't scale. And this is going to be a completely made-up story. It didn't happen. It never happened. It's not based on any true story. It's so far-fetched and obvious that nothing like this in the history of the world could ever happen in the real world, okay? So here it is. There's a teacher who doesn't exist, far, far away from here in a town that doesn't exist in a time long ago, who taught with a very set-in-stone curriculum. And this teacher had pre-programmed lines from different books and pre-designed exercises and pre-programmed concert works that they would do every year. And for the last few years, this teacher started to notice that the students weren't able to achieve the same results as with the previous orchestras. And they were all starting to get really frustrated. And the students were getting frustrated, and the parents were getting frustrated, and nobody could seem to figure out why. And the teacher thought, am I a failure as a teacher? Do I just have bad students? What's going on here? Well, let's think about it. What could be going on? It's 2024 as the moment of this recording. So what happened 3 years ago, 2023, 2022, 2021? Oh, yes, I remember that year very well. That's the year that I had to design virtual content for at-home learning. That's the year when I wasn't even in the same room as my students, right? And think about that beginner class. Think about how they learned. So you think that might have had something to do with it? Do you think that we might need to scale a little bit maybe? And how should we do this? We should scale with platitudes, right? And say, hey kids, if you want to become a diamond, you gotta have to handle the pressure. You think that'll work? Or do you think that your students will find that to be hollow? Maybe you could transfer some of your shame onto them and just explain to them, like, every student I've ever had could play this piece of music except for you. Yeah. That's the thing about shame, is that it scales too. But with shame, it scales infinitely. Unlike time, money, parent involvement, there's no upper limit to shame. And in this completely and totally hypothetical situation that's never happened before, maybe we could scale down the difficulty of the literature that we're putting in front of them. Maybe the students would agree to extra after-school rehearsals, maybe extra sectionals, maybe some one-on-one time. But maybe you have a family, and maybe they need to have to agree with that too, right? Because that's going to take away time from your family. So what if they don't agree? What if your students don't agree? What if they start quitting because of all the extra rehearsals? And here's where we really have to connect our values and the values of the people around us. I've been using this poorly drawn infographic for a while now, and values have always been at the bottom of everything that we do. But how much time do we spend connecting with our values? When we are forced to scale back, there is so much opportunity there that we can't even possibly imagine. When you take stuff away, it forces you to drill down and start asking why. Why do I like this piece so much? Why do I want so badly for my students to play it? And then from your students' point of view, why should they catch up their technique to learn it? What's in it for them? Do they put as much weight on the importance of this piece as you do? Do they put as much weight on their development as you do? When they map this onto their lives, and when they're creating a vision for their future, does this piece of music that you're challenging to learn have any relevance or matter to them? Or maybe a simpler question, how often does an 11-year-old even make decisions based on a 10-year outlook? That's like double their lifespan, right? Like never. So look, we have pieces that we play every year, and what would happen if we just pick a different piece? How do we get that choice to comport with our values and our students' values? That's the negotiation that we have to use here. Well, your students in this completely hypothetical situation, which has never happened and will never happen because it's so ridiculous, right? You have the choice to give them an easier piece. Okay, they'll learn different techniques, not the techniques you had intended, but they're still playing their instruments, right? And they're still engaged, and they're still developing a love for music. And you, the teacher, you, the adult in the room, are guiding them in that direction. You're getting to what's real, the core values, and you're being forced to knock down your structure, which is no fun at all. And you kind of have to start all over, but the reward you get is incredible because rarely are we forced to have to do that. Rarely do we have to be introspective. So when we're faced with challenges like a budget cut, or maybe the economy turns south and your students' parents get furloughed from their jobs and maybe they have to work 2 or 3 jobs and to make up the difference in pay, and they can't help you with the uniforms because they don't have time or whatever. And maybe they hired a new principal at your school who's an absolute train wreck. And how does that make you scale? And what can that teach you about your values and, more importantly, your students' values? Okay, let's switch gears. What happens when we scale up? When we win the lottery? Awesome, right? Well, ever see what happens to lottery winners? They almost always turn off worse than before they won. Most of them are bankrupt just short of a couple of years. And how is this possible? Well, it's because they scale up in a way that doesn't connect with their values. After buying a mega mansion and a couple of Lambos and they buy a Chuck E. Cheese franchise, they find out that they have to pay taxes on all those purchases at the end of the year, and they've run out of money, and now they're financially ruined. Okay, how does that relate to your orchestra? Your numbers go up. That's a good thing, right? You got more students in your classroom, but you have to scale with that. Your students are going to get less of your attention because there's more of them, right? Less one-on-one. Your cost might go up. You might have to plan a little bit. Let's say your budget increases, which, by the way, has never happened to me, not one time in the 21 years that I've been teaching. But let's say for you, your budget goes up. What are you going to do with it? Do you buy a class set of iPads? Do you buy new instruments? Hey, anyone notice that the cost of music keeps going up? Maybe you could buy more music. Look, I can't make these choices for you because what works for me probably won't work for you. Not exactly anyway. But I hope that I've given you something to think about. Maybe I've asked some hypothetical questions that you might be able to relate to, but here are 2 questions that I have for you that are going to tell you a lot. And I'm going to end the video with this. All right, question 1. What did you do this week in your classroom that really made you feel alive? And question 2, what scares you the most about this upcoming school year? If you want to connect to your values as a teacher, those are some great places to start. Anyway, hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it didn't come off as too preachy or too cringe. I never know until I put my thoughts out there into the world and see how people react. So let me know what you think in the comments. It really helps me to figure out when I'm onto something or when I completely miss the mark. Anyway, thanks for watching. I appreciate you, and I hope you have an amazing week. And I'll see you in my next video.